afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Cahill, and I'm a member of the First Friday Club of Chicago board. I'm here today to introduce our guest speaker. Just want to remind folks that go ahead and eat during the talk, because our speaker has to leave at 1 o'clock, and we want to make sure that she not only has time to speak, but that we have time for questions and answers, which, again, there are cards going around. If you have a question, please fill out a card, and there will be people walking around from the board to pick them up. On May 20th, 2019, Lori E. Lightfoot was sworn in as the 56th mayor of the city of Chicago. Her campaign's call for an ethical government and for opportunities for all Chicagoans took hold in every ward in this city. In fact, then candidate Lightfoot received a remarkable 73% of the vote to win the runoff election, capturing all 50 of the city's wards. Mayor Lightfoot's City Hall biography lists several watchwords, including these three: inclusion, transparency, and accountability. In 1983, while I was working door-to-door campaigning for Harold Washington in my Southwest Side neighborhood, a woman announced to me, "I am a white woman," as she slammed the door in my face. Despite many similar obstacles in a city with a checkered history of race relations at best, a few days later, Harold Washington won election as the city's first African-American mayor. Mayor Washington not only promoted inclusion in both the city and the Democratic Party, he embodied it. Last May, 36 years later, Lori Lightfoot won the mayor's office, becoming not only Chicago's first female African-American mayor, but also our first openly LGBTQ mayor. Add to that her efforts to expand affordable housing and to address inequitable distribution of resources throughout the city's neighborhoods. And once again, we have a mayor who both promotes inclusion and embodies it in her person. And as someone with an LGBTQ family member close to my heart, I can tell you, Mayor, you offer Chicagoans hope. Today's topic is integrity, except no substitute. Perhaps the biggest reason for the mayor's victory was her call for an end to business as usual in Chicago. Whether taking on the code of silence in the police department or elected officials who profit from government positions, Mayor Lightfoot's call for transparency and accountability has struck a chord with Chicagoans. Though proud that Chicago has been the city that works, we have begun to pay more attention to how that city works and to reclaim the role of integrity in that process. So it is my great honor to introduce to you today the mayor of the city of Chicago, Lori E. Lightfoot.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Well, you can tell that Mike and I are going to be fast friends, because with passion like that, talking about the importance of integrity in government, it's right up my alley. So we're singing from the same songbook. But thank you all so much for being here and being a part of this incredibly important organization in this conversation. I also want to thank Father John Kuzek for his years of service to our communities and his enthusiastic support of integrity in city government through the First Friday Club. Let me also thank the First Friday Club President, Rich Badome, and as well as acknowledge my wife, Chicago's First Lady, Amy Eshelman, who's also here with us today. In our discussion today on government integrity in Chicago, I'd like to start naturally by drawing on Abraham Lincoln and his return to politics following the Kansas-Nebraska Act. In a letter written to his friend Joseph Speed, Lincoln poured out his frustration over the advances made by the nation's pro-slavery factions, along with other bigoted elements. Writing to Speed, Lincoln said, and I quote, "As a nation, we began by declaring that all men are created equal. We now practically read it as all men are created equal except black people. I should prefer immigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty, to Russia, for instance, where despotism can be taken pure without the base alloy of hypocrisy. Now, what offended the future 16th president about the hypocrisy of slavery wasn't just his abhorrence to the institution itself, but how his existence stood as an abysmal blemish on the American experiment with democracy, unique to the world at the time, which allowed a poor farm boy like him to rise in the world. Yet as much as our country is rooted in a democratic form of government, the deeper principle which America stood for and which Lincoln felt so strongly about was in our society being rooted in merit. That unlike the aristocracies of the old world and its belief in the divine right of kings, our nation was born out of the ideal that everyone had an equal shot to succeed through their hard work and God-given talent. And though we obviously have not accomplished what we set out to do and fulfilled that ideal throughout our history, our power and our promise as a nation has nonetheless been rooted in that principle, all of which brings us to our discussion today. Now, for some, the word Chicago and integrity might ring a bit hollow given our infamous history. But we are finally working to change that, and it's well overdue. For decades, skeptics said that this stain in our city could never be washed away. The Chicago wasn't ready for reform. But my message to the cynics is this: get ready, because change is happening. Change is here, and change is going to stay in the city of Chicago. We are moving forward every day to ensure that we restore integrity, transparency, and accountability in our city government. And this isn't just me talking. I campaigned on change, and Chicagoans overwhelmingly voted for it. And there were a series of things that happened over the course of my campaign for mayor. But the key moment came when one of the most powerful aldermen in our city, and you know who I'm referring to, someone who everybody thought could never be touched, was indicted on a series of charges, all related to using his position to shake down businesses by using his power as an elected official to line his pockets at our expense. And let me depart from my prepared remarks to just pause on that. Probably none of you, or maybe few of you, read verbatim every single page of the charging documents, but I did. And one of the things that stuck out at me was not the allegations against Alderman Burke, and I'll add, he's entitled to a presumption of innocence. But what was most troubling was the description of an employee, I believe from the Department of Buildings, who got summoned to the ward office, went to the ward office, clearly got some marching orders, and then went to try to shut down the rehabilitation that was going on at the Burger King, just as a matter of course. And that, folks, is what we're fighting against. The obvious manifestations of corruption and a lack of integrity are certainly a problem. But in some ways, what's worse is how it has just seeped into the fabric of our government, where people feel like they have an obligation, unthinkingly, to keep perpetuating this cycle of giving to some and not others, of lining our pockets and not thinking about the public trust and our absolute responsibility as fiduciaries to the people of this great city who sacrifice every day, not only to live here, but to give their hard-earned taxpayer dollars so that we can do better for our city. That is the thing that we are fighting against. That is the thing that we must turn around, and we are well on our way to make sure that that happens. And I say this all the time. We have to be focused on integrity and ethics in government. As a city, as you know, we face many challenges, but we will never be able to face them and solve them if people don't believe that their leaders and elected officials stand for integrity, putting people first, not trying to profit from our positions. That is critically important to the lifeblood of our city. And I hear it all over. Not just from individual residents, from businesses, from prospective businesses. They want to know that we have a government that works, not just works for some, the clouded few, but works for all of us. And that is the mission that I am on as mayor of this great city. Now, there are those who will always be cynical, those who say there's nothing that can be done. But I know, and I've seen already in my 10 months, that we are on the right path. As you may recall, on my first day in office, I signed an executive order to end one of our worst institutional abuses, known as aldermanic prerogative. For those of you who don't know, aldermen in the wards had an unchecked unilateral power to stop, slow, or end any activity in the ward. Something as simple as going and getting a permit for a black cup, you had to go to the alderman. If you wanted to build, you had to go to the alderman. If you wanted to expand, you had to go to the alderman. All of these things that are, of course, grossly inefficient were also the breeding ground for corruption. We've had over 30 aldermen in the history of this city be prosecuted by my former colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office and sent to jail, and almost every single one of them is for some kind of abuse, many times small, but abuse of their power by shaking someone down, and it all centers around aldermanic prerogative. Now, that doesn't mean that aldermen don't have and shouldn't have an important voice in the operations of government. They should, and they must. And if they're doing their job well, as most of them do, they know the heartbeat of their ward. They understand what's going on and are an important representative. But unfortunately, there are some who believe that by their election, that they have been elected to preside over a fiefdom where they have unchecked power. That's not what democracy is, and not what it can ever be. And that's why we ended that practice on my first day in office. Now, of course, there are other things that we need to do. We cannot invest in neighborhoods when we have 50 separate sets of rules on where and how investment can happen. We are working to put together much more comprehensive and robust plans for moving our city forward, making sure that all of our neighborhoods, making sure that all of our neighborhoods get to participate in the greatness of the city. But again, we bump up against aldermanic prerogative when it comes to zoning. And it's a fight that we are going to fight. And my principles on this subject are simple. No city official, elected or appointed, should ever profit from his or her work or office. No resident should ever have to kiss the ring of any elected official just to get access to basic city services. And businesses should not have to learn 50 different sets of rules that change constantly over and over again just to be able to open their doors and grow their business in Chicago. But our work hasn't just been focused on aldermanic prerogative. We also passed the most comprehensive ethics reform package in recent memory, placing restrictions on outside employment, expanding oversight to ensure elected officials played by the same set of rules as the rest of us, and increasing fines for ethics violations, and limiting the influence of lobbyists in City Hall, all of which sought to ensure that our government stands for integrity and focuses first and foremost on being servants for the people, not the servants for themselves. Now, to be sure, these were not novel concepts, even though they were new to Chicago. They have been championed for years by countless good government reformers inside and outside of government. But what they lacked was a powerful champion in City Hall that understood that these were basic things that we should be doing to restore integrity in government. But as important as these measures are, they are in their own right. And as much as I believe in them personally, this is about something bigger. Good governments ultimately is a means to an end to making Chicago more equitable and accessible for every resident. We also need these measures because if people don't have a government they can trust, that is legitimate in their eyes, we will never be able to move forward. The people in our communities need to believe in us. I spent a lot of time in my first 10 months in office making sure that I travel every community in our city, that I am visible and present and accessible. And that's intentional, of course, because I want people to understand that I want to hear from them. I want to listen to what their daily struggle is, the things that are vexing them, that they're concerned about, that they need from government. And you can only do that by being out, in present, in an unfiltered way to hear from folks. And as you well know, Chicagoans are not shy about expressing their opinions. But people in our community need to believe in us. They need to believe that we are going to be responsive to their needs and that the same old is not continuing with this administration. And that's why we will keep disrupting the status quo, unabashedly, unapologetically, because that is the right thing to do for our people. As Lincoln felt so strongly over a century ago, our society is based on the idea that everyone should have a fair shot at success, to be able to live up and live out their God-given talents. And elemental to that is the belief in fairness. And that's only possible if we are a government that operates ethically and transparently, that refuses to deploy smoke and mirrors to manipulate the rules. And look, I'm not naive. I know that this culture of corruption, small c and large c, has been endemic in Chicago and is not going to change overnight. However, as long as I am mayor, I'm committed to making sure that we move forward as forcefully and as boldly as possible to change the saying that Chicago isn't ready for reform. Chicagoans elected me on a mandate to usher in a new era of government that includes equity, inclusion, transparency, and integrity. And I wholeheartedly embrace that. And I will continue to fight for good governance and ethical leadership, the foundation on which we have laid and continue to build on. So get ready, folks, because there's more to come. Before I begin our discussion, let me end on this. The ideals of having a government with integrity and accountability doesn't end at our city limits. From the 5th floor of City Hall to Springfield in Illinois, it is past time for a new era of trust between the people and the government they serve. And if I can be so bold, it shouldn't just be in our state. It must be in every state, in every capital, in every city hall, and, of course, in Washington, D.C. We have to show a different way. One of the things that I've been most concerned about over the last few years is the people feeling like the very cornerstones of our democracy lack legitimacy. As a lawyer, I'm deeply concerned about the attacks on the courts, on the Department of Justice, and really on the principle of the rule of law itself. If we keep eroding trust in the pillars of our democracy, a democracy that depends upon the confidence and legitimacy of the people to participate and hold elected officials accountable. If we destroy those core institutions, I worry for the fate of our country. We have to push back against anyone in any party, in any stripe, that tries to delegitimize the core pillars of our democracy. And for me, it starts with the rule of law. We cannot live in a world where any elected official thinks that they are above the law and that they can bend the rules to their favor, to their liking. We all have to play fair and by the rules. That's the thing that we teach our children before they go to elementary school. Be respectful. Even if you have difference, be respectful of those whose opinions may be different from yours. We have to do that in our civic engagement, in our public life, and as elected officials and public servants, it's incumbent upon us to model the kind of behavior that a 5-year-old would see and say, I want to be just like that. I say many times to our folks in the city, and I say it elsewhere, our children are watching us. Children are only going to be as good as the adults that are around them. And I want our children to succeed, not in spite of, but because of. And a core part of that must be that as adults, we model integrity. We model transparency, and we model the ability to disagree without being disagreeable and attacking people who don't share our view on an issue. That is critically important, and particularly so in this day of social media. We have children growing up who know no other world. They think that their lives are all being lived out on social media. That's why it's incumbent upon us when we see hate, when we see people who are trying to divide us, that we stand up in a united voice and say, not in our city, not in this time, not ever. And that is a core part of what we have to be. I want to thank everyone here at the First Friday Club for your efforts to continue to push us to be our better selves. That's important. Hold us accountable. Hold us to a standard of conduct that we want our children to be able to see and be proud of. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussion. All right. I guess I'm reading my own questions, which is obviously staying like, no, that's all right, fine, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
How are you tackling racial injustice in Chicago, and what are the greatest challenges to that agenda?
So I'll repeat the question. So the question was, how am I tackling racial injustice in Chicago, and what are the biggest challenges, yes. Right? Well, we're doing it, I think, in a number of different ways, and I hope that I stand for the opportunity to have this conversation. One is we're working very hard to make sure that we create real opportunity for people all across our city, regardless of background, country of origin, or zip code. That's critically important. I've said this many, many times. We have done an enormously great job over the last 10 plus years of really revitalizing our downtown and making it an incredible economic engine. That's great. But, and here's the but, that growth, that prosperity, and that wealth is not evenly shared across our city. I stood here a few weeks ago on a Friday and talked about our effort to end poverty in a generation in the city. What we see is the lack of investment and disparities across so many neighborhoods. When 1 in 5 of our residents are living in poverty, and a significant percentage are living in what the government calls extreme poverty, that's living on $8.50 a day. And a lot of that is due to intentional discrimination on the basis of race. We know that we have a long way to go. But I also look out in this audience and I see people who every single day are doing the Lord's work to help our most vulnerable citizens, our most vulnerable residents, and make sure that they have a voice and they have an advocate. I want to be a partner in that work. I am confident that given not just the financial wealth that we have in this city, but the people of goodwill who care deeply about their neighbor, that there is nothing that we can't do to take down the barriers that have separated us and really uplift the quality of life for everyone in our city. It's not just a nice aspiration. It's something that we're taking concrete steps to address. And I feel very confident that we're going to be able to turn things around.
The next question is, Nancy Pelosi has consistently rejected the claim that all Democratic candidates must be pro-choice. Because the party also seeks and welcomes the votes of pro-life Democrats, do you think there's still room in the Democratic Party for pro-life voters and pro-life candidates?
I know there is, and there are many in our party who are pro-life. Now, some of you may be wondering, wait, what's the mayor saying? She just endorsed somebody against Dan Lepiski. What's going on here? And here's what I would say. We have to be, the Democrats have to be a big tent party because that's who we are. We build coalitions. Now, we fight like the Dickens all the time, but we have to be a party that is welcoming to people of different views. It goes back to the point that I said before. We may not always agree on every issue, and we're not, but that's the great thing about democracy. We have robust conversations and arguments and discussions, but then we move forward. And people should be driven by their faith. And I know a number of people of goodwill who feel very strongly about this issue based upon their faith, and it's whether you're Catholic or Protestant. I feel something different. I am pro-choice. But that doesn't mean I can't welcome my brother or sister who has a different point of view on this issue. But the difference is we have to make room for each other to come together. That's the difference. And I think that's the thing that we do as Democrats.
Great, thank you. Can you tell me what initiatives you're putting into place to assist the homeless? The questioner says there are about 6,000 homeless children in CPS.
Actually, unfortunately, there's about 16,000 homeless in CPS. So here's what we're doing. And in this year's budget, we double the amount of money that we've ever dedicated as a city to address homelessness. And I should say this, if you look at what's happening in Los Angeles and San Francisco, fortunately, we are not seeing that level of displacement here in Chicago. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have our challenges, because we do. And particularly when you think about young children who don't have a place to lay their head every night, a place that they can go that's safe and nurturing, to do their homework, to get a hot meal. That's of great concern, and should be great concern to all of us. So we specifically put additional monies into programs that we know are focused on youth. And our goal is to cut the number of homeless youth in half in the next year alone, and more to come. And we know when we invest in our young people, and we're not just investing in homelessness, there's a lot of things that we're going to do. And Amy, I keep previewing because I'm anxious to announce it. We're going to be announcing a new initiative that Amy, my wife, and Sybil Madison, our deputy mayor for education, are heading, that's really going to be focused on the youth that are most at risk. We'll be making that announcement later this month. But we know when we invest in our young people, we're not only just helping them, we're helping their families, and we're helping their communities. So a lot of our efforts in trying to stitch back together the social safety net is focused around young people. And we've got to start with homelessness, because that's so critically important. We have worked, and this work certainly preceded me and will continue, to make sure that we're looking at the root causes of homelessness. What is really driving people out on the street? But beyond, even broader than that, what is making people housing unstable, meaning that they're couch surfing, that they don't have a permanent place to live. So looking at the root causes and really attacking that. But fundamentally, what we need to do is make sure that all of our residents have the ability to get a job that not only pays them a living wage, but gives them the ability to build a life and a future on. So the economic development efforts that we have embarked upon from day one are critically important, working hand in glove with businesses of all stripes, particularly our small businesses, because we know that small businesses hire more people. They hire people in neighborhoods. They support the local economy. That's also critically important. We think of these things as an ecosystem and not silos, but clearly homelessness, to me, is a sin that we have to address.
John asks, Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly are not solving the pension crises. How will Chicago solve its pension crisis?
Well, thank you, John, for asking the easiest question of the day. And look, I don't know that it's fair to say that the governor and the General Assembly aren't doing anything, but we all know that we have to do much more. I've said from day one that we have to, as a city, create an unignorable force to get Springfield to make tough choices. It's no secret what those tough choices are. But the critical thing that's going to be important is for us to build a chorus that can't be ignored. That's why I've spent a lot of time in my 10 months as mayor making sure that I'm reaching out to mayors all across the state. When you take, for example, a city like Peoria, that's done everything that we've said cities must do, right? They've cut their workforce. They have sold off assets. They've raised property taxes. They've done everything, and still their pension problem is consuming that city. So while our challenges are much bigger by scale, they're the same as many cities across the state. And we have to do something. We can't just assume that we will just generate new revenues and that'll be the end of it. That's not the end of it. We all know that. But I'm clear-eyed in 2020, which is an election year. It's hard to get things done in Springfield. Nonetheless, we are going to persist. We are going to make sure that we continue to reach out to build relationships with people all over the state. And I'm looking at 2 state reps who are covering their eyes. But folks, there's no more road to kick the can down. Our moment of truth is upon us, and we have to get something done. I'm hoping that will come incrementally this year, but in full bloom next year when we have a new General Assembly, because it's hurting our state. People are worried about state finances. They're worried about city finances. It's a question I get every time that I'm in any gathering, and particularly among our business community. They want predictability. They want to know what the future is like, and we have an obligation to make sure that we're doing everything we can to shore up our finances, and we can't do that without tackling the pension beast.
We've got 2 more quick ones, then we're going to have to let you go. Since you took office, you sort of already answered this one. Since you took office, what accomplishment are you most proud of and why?
I guess I would say this. I could point to very specific legislative accomplishments, but I think what I will say is this. To have our city hopeful again, every neighborhood, of all stripes, people enthusiastic about being part of this great city. And I won't say that's my accomplishment, but I think certainly the election opened up an optimism that people had been lacking. I heard it throughout the campaign. I still hear it. And that to me gives me real energy to keep fighting hard for people across the city. When we have that hope, when we have that enthusiasm about being from Chicago, there's nothing that we can't accomplish. And my goal as mayor is to make sure that we capitalize on this moment, that we continue to move forward, that we continue to engage people in every neighborhood and make good on the promise that I think my election ushered in. We've got a lot of headwinds that we're going to face, but when we have hope and we have confidence in each other and we believe that we are all working together and that there's goodwill all around, there's nothing that we can't accomplish.
Great, thank you. Here's the last one.
All right.
Michelle would like to know, who are you backing for president?
I think more than Michelle wants to know that. What I'll say is stay tuned. Thank you.
Just a token to thank you for your time. We appreciate you being here.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mayor. That was a great talk. We appreciate you taking questions. I know there were some that were a little tough, but we appreciate you being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule. Can we give her one more round of applause before she walks out? Thank you so much.